It's Sunday, December 15, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. Our guest today is a 30-year veteran of US politics, a Democratic strategist and commentator, and publisher of the Hopium Chronicles on Substack, Simon Rosenberg. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
There's a weird period of reflection going on right now. I think a lot of people I've found don't even, on the Democratic side, they certainly don't even want to engage with politics. It's almost as if the result was such bad news that people are in mourning, and I can understand that. But at the same time is running out ahead of the inauguration coming mid to late January, and we need a Democratic Party to fight the incoming Donald Trump regime. And I use the word regime appropriately, I think, because what we're hearing from his announcements, his cabinet picks, inviting President Xi Jinping to his inauguration, I mean, we are going to get that dictatorship that we warned of. So let me just start by asking you if, how to support the Democrats in this moment who are struggling coming to terms with what's happened.
It's a great question. And I think a few things. One is that we have to recognize that Donald Trump was legitimately elected, and he's going to be, even though it was a very narrow victory, and he's going to execute, his plan, and he's going to do it as he does everything, with enormous aggression and ruthlessness, and but also recklessness and buffoonery, and because he is all of that, right? I mean, he's both aggressive and determined, and also a buffoon and diminished and reckless. I mean, we have to, both of these things can be true, and I think that frankly, some of his appointments so far, his nominations, have been reckless, and we need to take advantage of that. I think the most important thing we can do in the short term is to take these mistakes that he made in his early nominations and really try to create pain for him, political pain for him and for Republicans, around the kind of norm breaking, the outrageousness, the ridiculousness of, in my view, now 4 of his central nominees, right? Getz was number 1 and he fell. Yeah, appointing a child rapist to the position of Attorney General was not something that we should have accepted, right? But to me, the next 4 that really matter, that we have to go to the mat on to fight with everything we got, are Patel, at FBI, Tulsi Gabbard as DNI,
RFK Jr.
RFK Jr. I call him Robert Kennedy. I don't give him the RFK moniker. Robert Kennedy at HHS, and then Hegseth at Defense.
Yeah.
These 4 people it's unacceptable for different reasons, but among them, in addition to their personal problems in many cases, is that they're extremists and they are not clearly patriots. And it is some, Hegseth is anti-NATO. I mean, he's one of the most extreme politicians, the most extreme nominees for a major position in our government in modern history. Kennedy wants to potentially unravel vaccines. And destroy the public health system in the United States. Tulsi Gabbard would be a material threat to our security into the West. And so, look, we're not going to be able to block everything, and we're not going to be able to block a lot of stuff, frankly, that he's going to do. But when he really errs, we have to be loud and proud. We have to be aggressive as hell. We have to be working 24/7, 365 in telling these stories to the American people. I'll give you an example. I in my own Hopium community, which is now about 160,000 people, I had some people in the early days about Kennedy saying, well, there's certain things that he's saying that aren't so bad,
Like the ingredients in tomato ketchup, for example.
Yeah, right. I mean, some of these, which is all everyone has to realize, is just a smokescreen, right? It's a political strategy in order to obscure the more dangerous things that he wants to do. And so I've been in a dialogue in my community about why I disagreed with that. And that Kennedy is, and you're seeing now more and more stories, including the one that the New York Times published on Friday about one of his top advisors has petitioned the United States government to revoke the license for polio vaccines, right? I mean, we are in such a crazy place. And I think that for the American people because I think that the one thing I'll say about our campaign is that there was a collective failure to explain the dangers and the depravity of Trump to enough people in order to win the election. There were lots of people that knew it already. They'd been voting against it in election after election, but there were a lot of lower information voters and new voters and people that had not really been part of the conversation, or people that were young who had grown up with Trump as president, right? Who saw him differently than other people, that we didn't have a robust enough conversation. Well, we need to have that conversation with them now because I don't know that they believe that they were going to be voting for getting rid of vaccines in the United States, or to turn the to turn our intelligence services over to the Russians and the Chinese, or to do or to get out of, to have the head of our defense department to be anti-NATO, which is an unimaginably crazy, position. And so I think we've got work to do here. And I think these kind of small victories, if we can get them sequentially, will weaken Trump. And he's already in a place where he only got 49% of the vote. He's not a towering figure, right? Pushing him back to a place where he's in the low 40s in approval rating and Republicans start getting worried about the midterms is a place that we need to get to as soon as possible.
Who is we when we talk about Democrats? Because
I like these questions.
I probably don't even need to flesh out this question because I think you know what I'm alluding to.
Yeah.
But there is a feeling among a lot of voters right now that Democratic leadership is missing in action. And I appreciate that it was hard for Kamala Harris as the vice president to step up and be the candidate for president. But then she had to default back to being the vice president. I mean, she also took a well-earned vacation.
Yeah.
But we haven't really seen much from anyone. And if it's more of the same, that could be problematic. So who is we?
So it's a really important question, right? And we is our, unruly, dysfunctional family of the pro-democracy center left, of which, you're part of. And I think that what's important, I wrote a piece on Friday about this very issue and about, the need to not check out, to not be overwhelmed by the ugliness that's going to come, but to recognize that the opportunity that we have now is there's an exciting opportunity ahead of us, in addition to sort of the bad things that are going to happen, which is that there's a necessity now and an urgency around building the next thing, around, letting go of where we were, and now building the next Democratic Party, the next center left, the next pro-democracy movement that is more modern, more and is built for this moment, right? As opposed to having been born and imagined in a different age, a more genteel age, an age where legacy media was more important. We are in a very different place. And I think that one of the great opportunities that we have together, what you're doing, for example, what I do at Hopium on Substack, we have to really be, we have to let go, we have to reimagine, and then I'm going to answer your question, but reimagine and reinvent and innovate together, and to let go of kind of old dogs, new tricks, old dogs, old tricks, right? We need new dogs, new tricks. But I agree with your assessment. I mean, one of the things I wrote about in my piece on Friday is that I think our politicians, our elected leaders, have an antiquated understanding of their job. And that the way that our party works is that there's a time for governing and legislating, and then there's a time for politics. That is not true anymore. Politics is every day. They need to be loud every day. The other side is loud every day. They operate 24/7, 365. They have immense power in dictating the terms of the debate. And we have to be far more focused on challenging their information superiority than we are to playing within frames that they establish for us. And so I think that one of the things that I'm calling for, and I wrote about in my Friday piece, is that our elected leaders need to see themselves not just as legislators, but as communicators every single day of the year. And that's every single Democratic elected official in the entire country. we are out there communicating every day, right? You and I are part of teams that are doing this. They have immense power, right? They have followers on social media. They are in elected office, right? They can break, but they have to reimagine their role now and recognize that they are vital warriors in this information war, and that sending out press releases to newspapers that nobody read anymore doesn't really cut it. And that there's going to have to be more Eric Swalwells and Jasmine Crockett's, and AOC's and less kind of old school Pauls. And that everyone has a role to play in this, in addition to building up the new organizations, new institutions, using new tactics and new strategies. But there has to become I think the way I described it in my piece is that we have to move from the governing party to being a party that's a ferocious opposition. And that ferocious is a critical part of this. We can't just I don't think we have the option of being a loyal opposition to a group that wants to destroy American democracy and to make and to ruin or to weaken and attenuate all the things that made us great. And we need to become a ferocious opposition. Are we there yet? No, we aren't. Do we need to get there as soon as possible? Yes, we do. And I think those of us who are in a position, it's easy for us to say because we're not elected officials and they have to work with their Republican colleagues every day, but we have to change who we are. We're moving from a governing party to an opposition party, and it's going to require us to view our roles very differently. We have very limited power in Washington. Things that we propose are not going to happen, right? So then what are people going to do all day long? They can't just complain either, right? We're going to have to be very strategic about what we do and where we target so we have wins. Getting wins like knocking Gates out and knocking out a few more of these early, reckless nominees are really important for us as a family to see that this effort to challenge Trump and to fight Trump can be successful. And that's why, I think this, what I call the unacceptable four, is the central battleground in the short term, that we have to knock as many of those four out as possible. Trump made mistakes. He should never have nominated any of these people, and we have to make them pay for it.
I'm very interested in what you say about us or Democrats being in the box that they have created for us. And to me, that speaks to, there's two Americas, as I've discovered. And a lot of the rhetoric of Democrats, MAGA Republicans would refer to it as wokeism and other things. But a lot of the stuff that we consider to be quite normal, inclusivity and diversity and even immigration, for example, it's like speaking a different language with these people. And so part of the problem as I see it is we're going to have to change up the language, because clearly they are talking a language that has clarity to the people that buy into that. You're never going to win over the extreme Trump supporters.
Right.
But clearly the independents and the undecided, they thought that the reality TV show guy as a dictator option was a better option than the mixed race, the female, the woke, all of the language, because there was a lot of that from the Kamala Harris campaign, talking about, I wouldn't even describe it as a word salad, but there was a lot of words. We are greater together. What joins us together is better than what separates us. I mean, I can't even remember. It doesn't roll off the tongue. And my worry was that so much of the campaign was about that feeling, but it didn't actually convert in the way that we had hoped. So how do we make, kind of cross the Rubicon into speaking in the simplistic language that clearly is where the American people are at?
Yeah, I think it's why, look, I think that despite us having significant information superiority over us at a strategic and tactical and operational level, right? Like in every way, we still almost won this election. I mean, I think it's really critical to realize that Trump is not strong. He's weak. He's a buffoon. He's reckless. He's a rapist, fraudster, traitor, felon. All those things are all still true, right? Like we can't let go of the reality of who he is. We have an obligation to not become part of his rehabilitation, right?
But he does have Musk, and he has Zuckerberg, and he has Bezos.
I understand, but we also have you, and we have Midas Touch, and we have Courier Newsroom, and we have, we also have tens of thousands of Democratic politicians who could all be a lot louder every day and become a much bigger part of this effort than they are. We could have a Democratic Party that operates 24/7, 365 instead of the 4 months before the election. Yeah. There's a whole different kind of mindset that we all have to adopt to understand that if we don't contest, there is a school of thought in our family that the way you do your politics is you just associate yourself with things that are popular. The problem is what is popular is being determined by them and not by us, right? And so if you believe that's how you should conduct your politics, you're essentially you're operating within frames that were built by other people, right, for you. And that's why I think that there has to become, I use the term loud and proud, is that, I have this story. I have a presentation called With Democrats, Things Get Better. And what it does is it shows since 1989, there have been 52 million jobs created in America. 50 million of them have been created under Democratic presidents, basically all of them. And we've now had, since the end of the Cold War, we've had 3 Democratic presidents who've come in and cleaned up messes left by Republicans. They left the country far better than they found it. We've had 3 Republicans who've left the country far worse than they found it. The last 2 have been wrecking balls on American society. And this fundamental reality, right, that when we're in power, we make things better for people, including working people, and they don't, is something that is unknown even by our own family. Right? And we have to become far more aggressive about telling our story and being on offense and not start getting up every day, starting with the world, the sort of the legacy media framework that has been severely influenced by the loudness that they have and their influence, right? We need to build our own thing and tell our own stories and not get up every day starting from defense. And I think this is going to require a culture change in the party. And by the way, I think this is doable because I think it's, you want to be loud and proud about your side, right? Like this is what I'm describing is not like hard, crazy stuff, right? And this is like the way we should just be doing our politics every day. And so, I'm relatively optimistic, right? That he's already indicating that his contempt, that his arrogance, let me just be clear, that Trump's arrogance, his diminishment, his madness, is already leading him to start going into places that will create enormous problems for him with voters already, right? And I think that if we have to seize those opportunities when they're given to us, like, for example, his comment that, to me, the vaccine stuff is, to me, this sort of existential fight that we have to have. And yeah, let's litigate whether we think being vaccinated for polio is a good idea. Let's have that debate, right? Let's have this debate. I think there are opportunities here in these debates to make sure that we not just oppose, but also propose, right? That we're going to get to a place by the fall, summer, early next year where you don't like this. Well, this is what we want to do, right? It doesn't have to happen right away, but it's got to happen. It's not good enough just to oppose and not be them. We have to propose and say that if you elect us in 2026, this is what you're going to get. And we got to fight like hell. And I think there's a gentility. I think we sometimes confuse being pro-democracy and believing in democracy with gentility. And we're not in a place where gentility is an option for us as a family. Just, it's not an option. And that we're going to have to fight in ways that are more appropriate to the moment with the intensity, the ferocity that our patriotism requires. And I think that for a lot of people that's uncomfortable. Well, then they should, tough shit, I mean, this is the moment that's in front of us and we got to go fight or we are going to lose. And lose means not lose to Republicans. Lose means, lose the most important experiment in in human history in the last 500 years, right? And I'm not willing. I'm going to go down fighting in that fight, and I know you are too, Anthony.
Do you think that Trump supporters, or even let's refer to them as people who voted for Trump this time around, as opposed to Trump supporters, because that's a kind of red hat rally attending person, but people who voted for Trump, do you think that they identify, not all of them, but many of them, as working people? Because for me, this is what's missing. It's like the Democrats talk a lot about working people. Biden mainly spoke about the middle classes and trying to grow from the middle out. But I am not convinced, and this is where there is a huge disconnection, that the people that want Trump and voted for Trump, they don't think of themselves as working people. They certainly don't think of themselves as poor. The word poor is never used in American politics. Excuse me. We use it all the time in England, because in England everyone's using coupons to go out and buy food. Whereas here it's almost like we use the phrase the working poor. Again, I don't hear
working class. Working class is really the only is like the lowest level, right? Like we don't get below that. So these people that we're trying to reach, maybe they don't want to be reached because they don't want to identify as working people or working poor. They just want to look at that guy with the shiny gold toilet and be like, the aspirational nature of supporting him makes them feel a little bit better about themselves. No, I mean, look, this is is part of my prescription about what we have to do. One of them is that we need to have a big conversation about how we talk about the economy, and that why it is that we made a decision, for example, in this election, to not talk about all the good things that were happening, in addition to saying we had a plan to take inflation. I mean, the idea that we had actually gotten inflation back to a pre-pandemic level, or that the economy was booming and the job market was great and the stock market was booming and all these things, that people were making more money. We didn't have that conversation with the American people, right? And I think that there was a mistake in the campaign believing they could sort of make her not an incumbent. She was always going to be the incumbent. And when you're the incumbent, you've got to defend your record. And so I think we could have defended our record, which I think we can defend. I think it's defensible, and talk about how prices were still too high and we wanted to get them down. The way that I describe this in Simon language, right, in Hopium language, is that we got on the wrong side of opportunity with too many people, right? That during COVID, I think the attacks on us in the 2020 election about being shut down Democrats stuck with a lot of folks, right? That we became the nanny party. We became the party that wanted to, be aggressive about COVID. And if you're a working person who has a job where you still have to go to work and, where you don't have a social safety net, and this is particularly true with Latino voters who got COVID more than anybody else, died of COVID more than anybody else, had less health insurance than anybody else, has less wealth than anybody else, less of a social safety net than anybody else, because undocumented immigrants in the United States have no social safety net at all, right, by the way, is that I think that for a lot of voters, working class voters, right, yes, seeing Donald Trump being successful, seeing Elon Musk, the most successful businessman in America, hanging out with him, created an impression, particularly for young people and for Latino voters, that I want to be like them. I want to make more money. I want to feed my family, right? I want opportunity. I don't want more government. And I think that I think Kamala understood this, by the way, because her line about, not needing just to get by, but get ahead, I think was one of the most powerful frames and articulations of this issue around opportunity that I've heard come out of our party.
Still too complex, though.
It is, but it still was in the right vein, right? Like, I mean, I want people not just to get by, but get ahead. I love that, right? I think that's great. But the point you're making, and this is where we have to be very careful in some of the analysis that we're doing, is that basically all young people are working class, right? And that this designation of working class is a little bit off when you have such a young cohort of people who are all in the early stages of their work lives, all of whom are making less money than people who are older, right? And also Latino voters who are all working class. There's virtually no accumulated wealth in immigrant populations, right? And so I think we get these concepts confused a little bit so I agree with your basic assessment or the basic question that I think that we didn't really fully grasp for a lot of people who've been through the recent trauma, not just of inflation, but of COVID, right? I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about what the disruption was. COVID was the biggest disruption to American society since World War II or World War I, right? Or the pandemic in 1918. It was unbelievable. It affected everybody, and particularly for people that had kids and young people. If you're a young person, I have 3 Gen Z kids. COVID was like a bomb in their lives.
Yeah, same with my kids.
Yeah, and so I think that we misunderstood in some ways about what the disruption was. The disruption wasn't solely inflation. Inflation was a manifestation of COVID, right? And that we disconnected these things. And so I think I'm getting a little bit of field here. But just to summarize my thinking on this is that I think that particularly for young men who were the ones that swung against us, arguably the most of any demographic, the shock wasn't just inflation. The shock was also COVID, where if you were a 22-year-old worker, all of a sudden you couldn't work anymore, and that like the fragility of this enterprise, a big chunk of their life was living in a time of fragility. If you're an older person, this was a short period of your life, right? A younger person, this was a very world-altering, world-shaping view. And many young people, particularly those who had been recently out of college, all of a sudden had no ability to make a living. I mean, my own son, one of my middle child, before COVID was going to be a chef, right? He was working as a professional chef when he was 15 years old. He's not doing that anymore because he saw the fragility of the food world, right? And so his entire life course was completely altered by COVID, right? And now he's in college, finishing a 4-year degree and studying, politics and so on. And so the level of disruption that took place, I think for young men, there are 2 things that we missed. One is this, right? And also that when young men during COVID, they went into a world, the gaming world, which is very libertarian, very right wing, where people like Elon Musk are heroes, right? The bro culture, right? Which was, they were thrown into that for 18 months and taken out of civil society. But the second thing is many of these young men came of age politically when Trump was president, or have memory of Donald Trump, not as the Trump that we all see, but as president of the United States, right? Which is something different, that he had already crossed a threshold of credibility that for many of us, he could never cross. For them, they grew up with him as a president, right? And so I think we have a lot of, as I was saying, I think that your fundamental point about us needing to recognize that for many of these people that just voted for him, all these billionaires in the cabinet are not a sign of oligarchy. They're a sign of like, I want to be like them, right? I want to be around people that make money. I want to work for a company that allows me to feed my family and buy a house and all the things that our striving young aspirational people want, right? And so I think we have to have a big conversation internally about all this stuff. And I think that even this sort of rush to claim the oligarchy around Trump may fall flat with some of these people, who have friends who invest in crypto who now are a lot wealthier than they were 3 months ago, right? Like there's just an entirely different economic conversation happening with younger people that we seem ignorant of during this campaign, that we need to do a better job at understanding in the coming months if we want to regain lost ground with these constituencies.
Trump effectively erased the pandemic from his campaign. So he just talked about his economy was great.
Right.
It took Barack Obama making a speech to remind us that that was his economy that Trump was claiming was his success, because as we know, the graph of growth did not change at all between Obama's second term and Trump's first until the pandemic. But he spoke of the pandemic very rarely. And he really kind of erased it. He just claimed that he had the greatest economy in the history of America. And the problem with having someone like him who can lie outright and not really see any pushback because he doesn't engage with media that would push back is that the lies to people who don't cross-check are the one, they see them as gospel. So how do the Democrats take on a movement that will say anything? I mean, he said in this interview, the Meet the Press interview he did last week, he said, talking about immigration numbers, and he quoted a number, I think it was a number that was a 40-year number, and he claimed that it took place during Biden's 3 years.
Right. No,
and there wasn't pushback. And he said, no, they've put out false information about this. I think the number was something like 10,099 murderers or something. Yeah. And he claimed that it was in 3 years, but it was a 40-year number.
Yeah.
And my worry is that you're not just up against people that support Trump, love Musk, think that Zuckerberg's a genius and see this kind of broligarchy as being a positive thing, but you're also up against the information warfare where he's realized he doesn't have to say the truth anymore. Yeah, it's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant. And I think even on this issue of the economy during the election, I mean, I think that the decision by the campaign was to say, we agree prices are too high and we have all these plans to deal with it, right? And an alternative narrative could have been, and in fact, the campaign even ran an ad about this prior to the switch that happened, was that we inherited a mess from Trump. We made everything better, and we have a plan to keep making things better, right? And that was not, we didn't take that path. And the reason what you and I are doing now is we're getting into something that I think is really important, is that we also erased COVID from the election, right?
Yeah,
that was a
decision. Good point.
That was a decision we made, right? Yeah. We could have talked about Trump's ruinous, that hundreds of thousands of people died because of him, and that he left the economy in the ditch, because the economic shock of the recession, the Trump recession, was incredible to the country. We had vast unemployment, right? Very quickly. And so the shock wasn't just inflation. And I think there was a misread of this by the campaign. And again, I wanted to say to the campaign, they had a very tough assignment. The switch happened. They had to do all these things really quickly.
Yeah, 100 days was not enough.
Well, not enough, right? Yeah. And all that stuff, right? Yeah. But I think that we ended up owning inflation,
right?
Instead of putting inflation into a box where it was part of Trump's mismanagement.
And worldwide inflation.
Inflation.
No one spoke about the fact that every country was suffering the same.
Yeah. No, there was clearly a different story we could have told about him and about us that we didn't tell. And the campaign made a decision to do that. But what it means for now, and what you're getting at, is that, in my view, one of the greatest projects in our family and one of the greatest opportunities we have is that we have to start taking credit for our success. We have to just be more comfortable with talking to the American people about how we've made their lives better repeatedly as a party, and they've been a wrecking ball. One of the lines that I have when you often hear pollsters and people in our family say, well, you can't talk to people about things are better if they don't believe they are. And my answer to that is twofold. One is they don't believe things are better unless you tell them. Right? So if we're not actually, you can't score unless you shoot, right? Unless we actually tell people things are better, there's no reason for them to believe it, right? Because lived experience is a political construct. It's not an objective reality. It's shaped by the information wars, right? And the second thing is that I don't know that there's any greater form of liberal contempt that exists in our politics than us believing that we can't be truthful to the American people about the economy and country that they live in. And this notion that we have to hide things from people that are true, like, the economy's booming, right? And the stock market is high and the uninsured rate is the lowest it's ever been. And we're in the best job market since the 1960s. If they don't believe it's true, unless we try to persuade them otherwise, then we're operating inside this right-wing frame that's been constructed by Trump's serial lying over a long period of time, amplified by Fox News and everybody else. And so I think the decision not to contest this issue that things are better was a very consequential decision in the campaign. And I think that going forward, I think that we're going to have to own the success of the Biden presidency, own the success of the Obama presidency, own the success of the Clinton presidency, own this basic idea that Democrats, our fundamental job is that we get up every day, as Bill Clinton talked about, fighting for the forgotten middle class, and that there's been one party that keeps putting points on the board for working class, working Americans, aspirational Americans, and that's us, and another party that repeatedly makes their lives difficult. The two big shock events of the last 20 years that have happened, which is the Great Recession, the loss of wealth of middle-class people in America that happened during that, and then the COVID shock, happened under Republican presidents. And those are some of the things that created this kind of social disconnection that encourages extremist politics. And we don't talk about those things enough, right? As being the kind of shocks that can lead to extremist politics, right? We have these
but it doesn't help that no one was held to account for the 2008 crash.
No, I don't disagree with any of that. I'm not going to argue that.
Would have been helpful to deal with things in the moment. And
there's no question, but also what is true is that we did get to the other side of the Great Recession, and that by the time Obama left office in 2015 and 2016, we had the most rapid wage growth in those 2 years that we had in 50 years. And so in the 2016 election, we had just been through a 2-year period of the fastest wage growth, real wage growth in America in 50 years. And we didn't make that case in the 2016. And remember, we lost the 2000 election with the economy booming. We lost the 2016 with the economy booming. We lost the 2024 election with the economy booming. Political scientists tell us that's not supposed to happen, right? If the economy is booming, then the incumbent party wins. And I think that, I think there has to be a big dialogue internally about how we can do more to take credit for how much we've made the country better over the last several generations and what a relentless, repetitive wrecking ball that they have been. This seems to be information that the American people deserve to have, and it's a story that we're not telling them.
Something changed last week, and I hope you kind of picked up on it as I did, and that was the assassination of the United Healthcare boss.
Yeah.
It as tragic as that was, and completely, an inappropriate response to whatever the grievance was, but it started a national conversation about corporate greed that we haven't really had before. And in fact, you could add to this the lobbying of Intuit and TurboTax, trying to get rid of direct file, this ability for people to file their taxes for free. I found it quite shocking that there were companies like TurboTax who made a profit up to 3 or 4 billion a year out of people filing their taxes. I mean, to me, that's just insane. Of course it should be a free government service. But they are now lobbying Trump to get rid of these systems. That is another example of corporate greed. United Healthcare has highlighted, they obviously not paying claims, but the amount of money that people are having to pay for insurance, and often their claims are denied, or they have huge co-pays. We know the story. Is this not a time for Democrats to actually look at that and maybe bring about some kind of language about controlled capitalism?
Well, I mean, I think there are two things that have happened in the last 2 weeks that are creating new conditions, right? And one is what you raised. The other one is the fall of Assad. And all of a sudden now, and I'm going to come back to your one. Let me just get through it this way. That all of a sudden now Putin looks like a loser and not a winner. And I wonder, what this is going to mean for the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party, for Donald Trump's own relationship to Putin, right? To these very pro-Putin nominees that he's put forth, like Hegseth and Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard, right? All of them, right? Yeah, I mean, some of these guys are just like Republican business guys. And then there are these other people, right, that come from this narrow pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party. And I think the fall of Assad is a before and after moment in our both domestic and global politics, because Putin now, is this kind of strongman, macho, shirt kind of image of Putin that exists in right-wing circles. He's now the pathetic guy who couldn't even defend, one of his most important allies. And They're about to potentially lose their most important military bases in the Middle East and be unable to project power, not only just in the Middle East, but also in Africa, right? So this is a huge event that's taken place. And I wonder whether or not, for the transactional kind of strongman that Trump is you notice that he invited, Xi Jinping, but not Putin to the inaugural, right? And that Putin is, and in part because he's a war criminal and he couldn't come here, he'd have to be arrested, right? But it's also because now, Tulsi Gabbard, they brought all the cabinet secretaries, nominees to Wall Street yesterday. Tulsi Gabbard was not there yesterday. I don't know. I mean, or on Thursday, when they went to New York, not yesterday, Thursday. And so I think one thing that I think is new that creates opportunities for us, and I think weakens some of these more extremist picks, is the fall of Assad and the weakening of Putin. I think this is a very consequential thing that Democrats have to start building plans around, right? Strategies and plans around. It's a big deal. It may affect, we could actually, perhaps it may mean that Trump may be open to keeping funding in Ukraine, for example. We don't know, right?
So it corners Trump a little bit because
it corners Trump and also
breaks with his plan.
And also for the right that loves Putin, he now looks like a weak man and a failed man and not a strong man. And we don't know yet what this is going to do, but there's an opening here to weaken the pro-Putin, pro-Russian ideological wing of the Republican Party, which is really important for us as Americans, right? The second thing, going back to your point, is that I think that as you think about if your strategy and your thought on this is correct, that there's going to be opportunities for Democrats to point out that he's rolling over for corporate interests and abandoning working people, the exact opposite of what he promised. We have to pick our shots here. Just like I'm only sort of promoting the idea of going after 4 of the cabinet officials and not 15 of them, right? That we have to be narrow in our focus and pick 1 or 2 of these kinds of really crazy things, these just clear giveaways to corporate interests, to be able to sell them to the American people. We can't take the bait, in essence, which is we pursue everything that he does. He's going to do 20 crazy things. We have to be disciplined enough to talk about 2, right? Or 1 as an example. And I don't know what those are going to be yet. It could be the ones that it could be, Turbo, the free filing. It could be something to do with him trying to strip away the ACA, because that when they lost in 2018, I was the lead strategist for the DCCC during the 2018 cycle. Their attempt to strip the ACA away was the central reason we blew them out in the midterms in 2018. And so there's going to be other opportunities for us, because what happened in polling in 2017 is that Trump, when he came into the White House in 2017, he was even or ahead with he is fighting for people like me. After the ACA and the tax cuts, that dropped by like 10 points, 15 points on its own, right? And all of a sudden, he wasn't aligned with the working people. He was aligned with oligarchs, right? And wealthy people of privilege. He did that to himself. It is very likely he's going to do that to himself again, because that's who he is. He's far more... Well,
he has a concept of a health plan, as we know.
Right. And he's far more ideologically a champion of oligarchs than he is for working people, right? Yeah. The big lie about him being for working people is going to be exposed very quickly. And I think we have to be very judicious about how we package this and explain this to the people, those struggling workers that just voted for him. I will tell you that in the Hispanic community, for example, this thing they're going to do on day 1 now that they've announced, which is to remove the rule about not pursuing undocumented immigrants in churches, schools, and hospitals and doctors' offices. That is a big deal.
Yeah.
To immigrant communities. I mean, that's going to affect, that is going to create a terror regime on day 1 that's going to affect, because many, many undocumented immigrants live in what are called mixed status households, meaning that they may be undocumented, but their spouse is legal or their brother's legal and they're not, right? And this notion that there is this like ghetto of undocumented people only in blue states, right? I mean, we know that Texas has one of the largest undocumented populations. Florida has a massive undocumented. those kinds of efforts to do what we've called in the past attrition through enforcement or self-deportation, the whole theory behind that is that to deport all of these undocumented immigrants would cost way too much money. And it would be unpopular. So what they want to do is they want to create a terror regime where people self-deport. This is the theory. This is what they're going to do. It's why Homan right now is talking about, hey, we only want to deport criminals. Well, that's already the policy of the government, right? That's already.
But they want the whole family to go too.
Right. So we're about to see another instance where, immigrant communities that just voted heavily for Trump are about to see what this guy is really about, right? It's going to come very quickly. And so I think but my advice to the family is that we have to be judicious and smart and disciplined about picking the right fights, the right things to communicate, and not respond to his fire hose with our own fire hose, right? Because then, if we're already at an information disadvantage, the only way we break through is by repetition, being disciplined and pounding stuff over time, right? Not in a week. We have to be, the way I like to talk about this, I don't like the term messaging, which is our term in our language in the Democratic Party. I'm more of the belief that we need to make arguments, and that arguments are things that you sustain over time. Messages are ephemeral. And I think we have to recognize that the only way you win an argument over time is by sticking with it and fighting it out every day and being disciplined about it and not bouncing around to create a message that touches different groups. We need to make big arguments. That's what they do. We need to be smarter about that going forward, in my view.
We have to take a quick break, but I'd like to come back and kind of flesh that out, because a couple of things you said have given me an idea. And that's, I guess, what this type of environment is all about, new ideas. So we'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Did you know that 4 companies control over 80% of the US meat industry, and China now controls the largest portion of US pork? These companies are using mobster-like tactics to crush American family farms, and with the additives they're putting into our food, Americans are stuck with sketchy meat. So what can we do about this? Let me tell you about a company that's coming up swinging on behalf of American family farms and your family's food security. Moink. Their business is simple. Moink's meat comes from animals raised outdoors, where a pig is free to be a pig. Their farmers are given an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, and they deliver meat straight to your doorstep at prices you can actually afford. Born, raised, and harvested right here in the United States. Support American family farms and join the Moink movement today at moinkbox.com/weekend right now and get free wings for life. The best wings you'll ever taste for free, but for a limited time. Spelt MOINK box.com/weekend. That's moinkbox.com/weekend. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Alo or Allbirds or Skims, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. And the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions by up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/weekend, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/weekend to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back with Simon Rosenberg on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. Just before the break, you were alluding to trying to identify voters and potential voters in a kind of new way. And I was thinking, instead of this focus on working people or the working classes or even the middle classes, that with Donald Trump increasingly aligning himself with foreign enemies, whether it be the likes of Russia, or, I mean, who only knows? I mean, there's a long list. You know, Hungary and Viktor Orban is another. That actually referring to people as Americans, and the fight being between America and these foes, the fact that Trump is aligning himself with America's foes, to me is a huge opportunity for the Democrats to say, look, do you want to be on the right side of history? And because I'm very much of the opinion that, especially with the kind of Instagram generation now, like nobody wants to give the impression that they are the working poor. Everyone has an Instagram account that makes them look much more wealthy and more successful and well-traveled.
And cool. Yeah.
And cool. Yeah. And so, you know, that is what's changed in the last decade. That people tend to live these kind of fake online lives. And the reality is a lot of people are at home and they're, you know, keyboard warriors.
Yeah,
and
slugging it out.
Angling the camera up, you know, gives you a whole new face. So therefore, would it not be pertinent for Democrats to actually enlighten people that Trump is actually not for America?
Listen, I think that one of the great legacies of the Harris campaign, and one of the great things that we have to celebrate and incorporate into our politics was at the convention, I really felt that week was a week where the ideology of the Democratic Party was patriotism, right? I mean, it was not left or right or neoliberal or progressive or any of these terms that we use. It was just kind of raw patriotism, love of country, which is the correct antidote to nationalism, right, and to oligarchy. And I really do think that week I felt like it was in some ways the best Democratic Party that I had seen since I had gotten into this business a long time. And I agree with you that I think that patriotism, love of country has to be sort of a guiding, sort of the fuel for us, because of the material threat that he represents to all the things that have made us great.
But it's that he hates it, not that we love it so much. It's more about him disrespecting the flag.
Yeah, well, we tried to make that case during the election, right? I mean, I think to be fair, that was a central argument of the campaign. I think that, you know, we just didn't reach, there's just certain people, you know, particularly Latinos, right? Latinos are historically, immigrants are often on scales of patriotism. They tend to be far more patriotic because they've come to the country more recently and have been driven by this kind of idealized America, right? Like I came here to be part of that great America, and that they are often, just based in polling, the most patriotic Americans are often immigrants and often Latinos, by the way, right? And so I do think this narrative about his betrayal of America, I've used the term in my own writing that betrayal is a very important sort of concept with Trump, right? That betrays people, he betrays working people, he betrays his wives, he betrays all of us, right? He betrays the country. Yeah, he betrays the country. It's why, you know, him stealing documents was a betrayal. He's in my view, Donald Trump, we should have used terms like traitor to have about him, because I think it's actually central to who he is. He's trying to unravel everything that's made us great. He's not trying to restore. This is not a restoration. You know, he's trying to undo the global economy that made us prosperous. He's trying to undo the Western alliance that made us safe. He tried to undo American democracy, which has kept us free. He's an assault on everything that's made us great.
And now he's deconstructing the administrative state,
or whatever it is they think they're doing.
Yeah.
Right? You know, and this feels to some degree deeply performative, but we'll see if it gets real or not. I have my doubts about it. But we'll see. I mean, it's going to be another area of engagement. And I think that they, you know, look, his strategy is to flood the zone, right? In every way, message wise, move lots of people all at the same time. The government's going to be pursuing 18 different courses at the same time. He's aware that he stays ahead of everybody, right? By flooding the zone, right? It gets much harder to follow him, to counter him, to contradict him, right? And it also means that they're taking up all the legacy media space. I do think that one of the and I now realize I forgot to put this in my Friday post, and I meant to, is that his line about how the legacy media has become docile and treating him better since he won, and that he expects that they're going to stay there. It was a pretty chilling authoritarian kind of statement, right? Yeah. That kind of didn't get a lot of coverage in the legacy media, because why would it, right? But I think that we are going to have an opportunity based on what he does to tell a story about us and them that is going to be where we're going to have to be very, very disciplined, recognizing that, by us not having power in Washington, it also puts us at an even greater information disadvantage than we were before, right? They're going to be louder. We're going to be less loud in this new world. And it means that we have to be, and this is going to be something that I think is going to be hard for the Democratic family to really accept, which is that, there are going to be bad things that are going to happen that we just can't fight, that we don't have the bandwidth, the capacity,
or the votes.
Or the votes, and that we're going to have to really be disciplined about picking our shots. And I think this is going to be really hard for people in our family to watch us capitulate on things that we just can't win, right? In order to focus on the places where we can win. And I think I have started having that conversation inside my own Hopium community about how, there are other cabinet officials that are not so good, other than the 4 that I've been recommending that we stay focused on, right, and to knock them out. I've been asking my Hopium community to call their senators and their House members, telling them that they expect them to be fighting against these specific 4, right, and to be calling the White House and asking Joe Biden to initiate an order that the security clearance process for these 4 begins now and not after Trump. These are things we can do now, right? But our elected leaders need to hear from us. Anyone who's listening to this who wants to do something and to not just feel powerless, make sure you're calling your reps and your senators, whoever they are, Democrat or Republican, and letting them know every day about how you feel about things, right? These calls matter to people. And it has to be your senator and your congressman. Calling to other ones matters a lot less. They know when people call from outside the district and outside the state. And those calls are not really kept. They care about what happens with their own constituents. So there are things that we all can do. And also we have to get smarter about these threats. And my recommendation to people in my community is that, you don't have to read talking points or feel like you are an expert on everything, right? Pick one issue that really matters to you, whether it's reproductive freedom or, Pete Hegseth and defense and NATO, and study and become smarter about it. And have that when you have your talks with your friends and people in your networks and your communities and talking about Trump and why you're against Trump, you only need one thing, right? You can say, this is what matters to me. This is why you don't have to say what Hakeem Jeffrey, and I know we're saying we all have to be disciplined, but what's also true is that to be an authentic communicator, it has to be something that matters to you, right? Personally. And so just what I advise people is that in this difficult time that's coming, pick one thing. And that when you're in a situation where you feel like you can have a meaningful conversation with somebody about the moment, say, this is why I'm worried about Trump. I know there are a lot of reasons and other things, but this is what matters to me. I think that's really important, right? Because I think you become far more persuasive and effective in these conversations we're all going to be having with neighbors and friends and colleagues and so on and family members. If you don't look like you're doing scattershot stuff and that you're reasoned and thoughtful and you've done your homework, right? And so I think this is going to be, my last point on this is that this is going to be a hard period for all of us. This is going to be hard. Bad things are going to happen. And we have to steel ourselves. We have to prepare mentally, psychologically, emotionally for what is going to feel like an assault on our values and not disengage, right? You've said this at the very beginning, right? We have to stay involved, stay healthy. And it means that maybe, picking one thing is the thing that you're going to really focus on is the right way to sort of stay healthy and stay engaged, right? It means that doing volunteering on elections and campaigns that are going to be coming up is another way to engage. There's going to be plenty of ways to take that anxiety, fear, and worry you have and channel it into constructive, concrete action. What is really critical for us is that inside the family, we are not all going to agree on things. And it is, we're going to have to be very reticent about, going after each other in this difficult time. I mean, we have to be, he's the guy we have to stay focused on. What they want to do is they want to divide us. They want to push us apart. They want us to be fighting with each other. They want us to disengage. And there are going to be things that are going to happen that I'm not going to be happy about. But I'm not going to be critical of our leaders because I think they're going to be asked to do very difficult things now. And we have to be a little bit sympathetic to the challenge of the task and be as supportive as we can and be vocal when we disagree, but to not have this become factional and for us to descend into factions and into camps, because then we lose and then he divides us. And that's how autocrats win, right? Is that they're going to seek to find these places to push us apart. And we have to be smart enough to make that hard for them. Not easy.
The pairing of Kash Patel leading the FBI, and it's kind of looking like he might get a Senate confirmation, and Pam Bondi as Attorney General. She is, of course, like a former Trump lawyer, effectively, and that separation of branches is clearly not going to happen. He's going to run the DOJ as he did the last time. It's particularly dangerous because Kash Patel is a conspiracist and he's got this retribution. I mean, they were talking about going after Hunter Biden. I mean, is it any wonder that his father wanted to pardon him? They're not going to let old stuff lie, it seems. And to me, the obvious direction for Democrats in this moment is to expose the conspiracies, the insanity, the weirdness, but also go after those basic tenets of America, which is Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and the very things that will change under Donald Trump. That, losing entitlements, that is going to hit everybody. So how do you kind of balance exposing the insanity, but also managing people's understanding of the deconstruction of the institutions?
Well, I think we've talked about this a little bit, right? Is that we have to pick our shots. I mean, we have to be disciplined and we have to,
Because it's a lot, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, no, and that's
going to be a lot.
No, and that's my whole point. Like, my whole point is that they're going to flood the zone. This is their strategy. And by us, pursuing every day the new outrage, the new thing, we're playing into their game, right? And that's why we can't operate. We need to oppose, but we also need to propose. We need to not allow them to fully dictate the terms of the debate every day, right? Like, we need to we need to pick our 2 or 3 things that we're going to sort of go to the mat on. I mean, I think there are these 4 initial nominees are worth going to the mat on. And I would like to see, frankly, my party a little bit louder about this than they are right now. I think in terms of the governing things, we don't really know what he's going to do yet. But it can't be. I mean, I even wrote about this on my post on Friday. I literally shared all these crazy things that Trump did in the last 24 hours, these crazy stories. And I said, I'm not going to turn my daily writing into a litany of his depravity and his craziness because, A, who would want to read that, right? It's just not, it's depressing. It's too depressing. And it's also just, it's ugly. And I think that we have to be disciplined about recognizing that there are going to be these things that are glaring opportunities for us to go talk to the American people about. And then there are going to be things that we're just going to have to let go because we just don't have unlimited bandwidth. We have limited ability to communicate. And it could be that it ends up, if they really start going after Social Security, I mean, that polls at 90-10 against them, right? For example, and maybe that's where we go. I don't think we know yet. But again, my worry, I'm not a worrier by nature, right? Like I have this phrase at Hopium, we do more and worry less. And I try to actually encourage people not to worry so much, but to really, we all are worried, but you have to channel that into concrete action in order to keep your wits about you, right? And to keep to manage all of this emotionally and psychologically, the stuff that's going to come, is you need to channel it. I also joined a gym and I'm working out much more, which is one of my ways that I'm going to manage the next 6 months, 9 months. And all of us need to do things like that. Is that, but I think that the point about this is that we're going to have to learn how to be an opposition party now. We need to learn really fast because it's going to come really quickly. And the thing is, because of the nature of Congress, where there are committees and people have their own interests, there's going to be enormous pressure on the leadership to fight on 20 or 25 fronts at the same time. And they just can't do it, or we're going to lose, right? We're going to lose that. We don't have the firepower to fight on 20 and 25 things. And I think that this is going to look to our family like capitulation, right? On things that matter to them. And this notion of being disciplined and staying narrow and staying focused is going to be hard for us. It's not our nature, right? We want to do 20 things at the same time because they're the right 20 things to do, right? And if we do that, we're going to lose. And I think that's why, this period for us, I think, is going to be challenging. Even just take the NDAA, right? That just got passed in the House with these outrageous, ridiculous anti-trans stuff that Democrats ended up accepting. There are going to be things like that we're just going to, we're going to take the lesser of two evils in a deal. And it's going to feel offensive and difficult for us, our family, to manage. But it's going to happen. And we have to be wise about this and not be hysterical about it. And
these things can always be reversed. I suppose
they can be reversed. They can be reversed. And also there is, what happened in 2017 and 2018 is there were two things that caused us winning by 8.5 points in the midterms and flipping the House. And it was the repeal of the ACA and the tax cuts. It wasn't 100 things. It was two things. Two things broke through with voters and cemented and stripped away this notion that he was a hero for the working class. And we only need one or two things, right? They were able to use the anti-immigrant trans stuff to define us, right? You don't need 100 things. I don't know what they're going to be yet. And we have to be opportunistic, but also strategic, right? As they come and to be disciplined. And I come back to this basic point that I have been shocked at how reckless Trump has been out of the box. And
he's not even president yet.
He's been reckless and wild and undisciplined, and politically he's taking enormous dangerous risks politically, right? Already. He's not been measured, mature, thoughtful, serious, right? The two times he's spoken in public, he's looked old. He sounded batshit crazy, right? He's an extremist. He's still that same guy, that buffoonish, reckless, diminished guy that we've been watching in the
He's compromised.
Yeah, but he's the same guy that he was 2 months ago. He's not all of a sudden becomes, shrewd and smart and savvy and disciplined, right?
Yeah.
He's
you don't
still
stop being nuts just because you win the presidency.
Right. And in some ways it may actually contribute to his recklessness and his arrogance, right? Yeah. Which I think there's some evidence that's the case. Because I think none of these Republicans want to vote for these four crazy people. And he's created tension inside of his family already that was not necessary after a big win. They didn't get to do the victory lap. They're already in places of enormous contention internally, which was risky and dangerous, right? And to what end, right? What does Tulsi Gabbard get you, right? She's obviously unqualified for this. So long story short, just to wrap up this part of it, is that, I'm optimistic that we're going to be given opportunities to define him early in ways that breaks through this myth that animated some of the people that voted for him. But it means that we're going to have to play at a higher level of the game than we've been playing at, I would argue. And also, we don't have Joe Biden anymore. The truth is Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer have been sous chefs and not main chefs in the message wars of the recent years. And they're now going to be primary actors. There's not going to be anybody above them anymore. There's not going to be an administration.
That is a problem, isn't it? Because
or it's an opportunity, right? We don't know yet.
I think it is with Hakeem Jeffries, because he shows great potential. But the representation of the past in Charles Schumer leading the Senate is not doing what you are calling for, which is a kind of fresh sweep and bringing in this. I mean, the new generation are brilliant. Jasmine Crockett, you mentioned, is mind-blowing. AOC, as we know, is mind-blowing. She's almost old enough to be president now as well.
Cory Booker, who just got into a leadership positions. The thing about Schumer, though, the one thing I'll say about him, and I don't disagree with the people who make this argument that, but it is what it is, right? Schumer also, though, likes to win. He's a fighter. And he's a warrior, and I think that we can't discount that, right? We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know. History calls, people answer. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, right? We don't know. And what's going to happen is this is a moment where dozens of Democrats around the country are going to be given opportunities to lead now. Gavin Newsom in California, right? Josh Shapiro, some of the governors that we have are going to be able to lead in new ways and creative ways. And that's why I think at the end of the day, one of the things that I just want to counsel or encourage all of you to be is to be, when I try to rationalize the darkness that's about to come or that is already here and will continue, one of the great opportunities we have is to innovate, to see the generational wheel turn, to let new voices emerge, to let new institutions assert themselves. This is going to be a very entrepreneurial time for us as a family. And those are healthy times. This can be a time of enormous health and strengthening for us. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind too, right? That this is that in this duress, there's also opportunity. But we should be demanding of our leaders every day in calls we make to them, in my commentary, your commentary, that they understand the nature of the conflict that they're really in now, and to recognize that the old way that we sort of manage that conflict was insufficient, and that we need to upgrade our strategies and our tactics in order to be competitive, and that if we think we're just going to execute off the same old plan, we should expect to lose. And I don't know what that means, but what we should be doing is helping create new understandings of what's possible. Part of the job of people outside who are not drinking water from a fire hose every day like politicians do is that we have the luxury of sort of playing around with stuff and throwing out ideas and kicking stuff out there that may be opportune places for people to go, right? That's part of your job, right? It's what we're doing here today. And I think that what's exciting for you and for all of us is that for those of us who are in that business, there's more opportunity to create new understandings than there was 6 months ago. And so our jobs become arguably more important now, right, than they were before.
Well, with the downfall of the corporate and mainstream media, who failed to hold Trump to account in that election campaign, now clearly there is a lot more focus on independent journalism and people who are not run by kind of corporate overlords. I just want to ask you, Joe Biden made a joke the other day, and I kind of feel like he wasn't really joking. He said, I should have signed my name on those stimulus checks, which of course he was alluding to Donald Trump's propaganda when the stimulus checks went out the first time and they were delayed because he wanted his signature on, make it look like the money had come from him. Biden didn't want to do anything like that, A, because it's ridiculous, and B, because it would have delayed the checks. But actually, that is quite a good metaphor for what we're talking about. The branding of the Democrats going forward is about signing your name on the check.
It's about playing at a higher level of the political game, right? And that, as I said earlier, the time for gentility and is gone now, and that we have to play a different game than we've been playing.
Because the other side is still really angry, and they won, Simon.
Yeah, no, they won, and also the fact that people were convinced and persuaded that the economy was terrible, was an enormous failure by us, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, there could have been a different story that people went into the election with about the economy. And some of this had to do with the transition, the change, and, and that some of it was Biden's age prevented people from breaking through. But
why not say that he's telling us that the economy is bad because he wants to take credit for it when he's in office, and then say it's suddenly good,
and then he's lying, right? And then he's a fucking liar, right? And he's a serial liar, and to take that on more, right? Because he's not just hurting. Trump isn't just hurting the Democratic Party when he does that.
No, he's hurting the country.
He's hurting the country because he's what he wants. And if I can end with this, is that sure. I have this theory about MAGA, that MAGA is at its core strategy is to pump negative sentiment into our discourse every day, that they want us to feel bad about our institutions, our democracy, our leaders, our economy, each other. And because Trump wants to make the case that everything has failed in order for there to be radical solutions, right? This is how authoritarians come to power. There has to be a sense that the system has failed and we need to try radical new solutions. And we have to understand that when they talk down America, we have to talk it up. I mean, we could have said that one of the ways that Donald Trump is betraying the American people is by lying to them about the success of the American people in getting us to the other side of COVID,
right,
and building the strongest economy in the world, right? It could have been not just about Joe Biden and government and Democrats. It could have been his disrespect for the American people,
yes,
and their grit and their resilience and their hard work in building the strongest economy in the world. And that it was an insult to them, not to us, right? And that's the point I was getting at earlier, that when he talks down America, we have to talk it up, that we have, because what he wants is he wants there to be a sense of systemic failure.
Yeah. It's the Fox News model.
It's the Fox News model. And it's also, I go back to one of the most shocking moments in my own evolution of understanding about all this, when Anne Applebaum, the great historian and author, wrote a column right after the Republican convention in 2016, where she said, I live in Europe, I study, I live in in Poland, and I study Russian propaganda, and that I just want everyone to know that Trump's speech in 2016 echoed core major arguments that the Russians make about the United States, and that he spent the entire speech trashing the United States. He famously said in 2017 that there was really no big difference between Putin and American presidents, right? We all do bad things. And I don't know that the American people and the proud patriots that we all are really understand how fundamentally the Trump project is about diminishing the United States itself and the things that to making us not proud of ourselves, proud of our achievements, proud of what we have brought to the world. It's about making America be bad, and for it to be failed, and for it to be, this corrupt set of liberal institutions that have destroyed the West and the United States and foisted trans rights on us and all the stuff that they do. And that part of our response to that, as we saw during the convention, by the way, was this to have one of the fuels that energizes us in the coming battles is this love of country and this passion for the greatness and goodness of America. But that means we also have to believe that, right? And that's why these stories about our success are not just tactically necessary. They're necessary in order to defeat the core narrative of MAGA. Because if America is successful, if we are the strongest economy in the world, if we have the lowest uninsured rate, if crime has come way down, if Joe Biden and the government of the United States has been successful, if we've now weakened the Russian, Iranian, Hezbollah, Hamas alliance, if we've revitalized the West, if we've done more to counter climate change than any government in the history of the world, and if we've been successful and virtuous, then Donald Trump becomes like the witch in the Wizard of Oz, and he melts, right? And we did it at the convention. We didn't do it in the campaign. And what I think that people have to recognize as part of our job is that love of country, love of the American experiment, the expression, making the expression of patriotism, of love of country, common and routine and not weird and normal and unnatural, right? is one of our collective jobs here. What I do at Hopium, right, the whole reason I adopted the Hopium name, sort of irrational hope, whatever you want to call it, is that I really do believe that one of the way that we defeat MAGA, one of the central ways, is that we have to counter their negative sentiment with positive sentiment. And that we have to recognize the information war is not just about information, it's also a sentiment war. And sentiment is a critical part of this. And when we are living entirely in negative places and anger and frustration, it's actually advancing their politics, right? And we have to, and that's why this next phase for us as opposition is tricky, right? And because we have to be joyful warriors, optimistic warriors, and not just angry and bitter warriors, right? And disappointed warriors. We've got to figure out tonally how to do this. And because I do think that if we just replicate their arguments, if we repeat their diminishment of the United States and their anger, and is that we have to, it's about MAGA. The MAGA ideology, right? And Trump. And it's not about America. This is the greatest country on earth, right? We have to stay with that sentiment, I think, in order to eventually defeat MAGA. And I think that this is a big conversation we have to have in our family. It's not just about winning the information war. It's also about the sentiment aspect of the war itself, which I think is something we have to talk about much more. I've really enjoyed this. I don't know that I've done such a long interview, but this is the time to air things out. I mean, if Joe Rogan can talk to Trump for 3 hours, you and I can hang out for an hour and 15, and because these are complex things. And one of the things I was anxious to come on your show is that it's such a blessing to be able to air this stuff out the way that we did, today, and hopefully everyone who's listening will have gotten something from it.
I hope so too. Simon Rosenberg, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thanks so much, Anthony.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. You can see more from me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast. And I'll be back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.